The first thing I noticed when my car sputtered to a stop was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. The road stretched behind me like a ribbon cut from the world, and ahead, only a leaning sign that read Eldridge Junction, Pop 42. The paint was peeling. The arrow pointed left, toward what looked like a forgotten cluster of buildings half swallowed by dust. I told myself it was just bad luck. A busted radiator, an old car, a late afternoon sun already sliding down behind the mesas. I'd been driving from Denver to Phoenix for a job interview that could have changed everything. Instead, I was stuck on a two-lane road with no cell signal and no shade. Eldridge Junction looked like something out of a faded postcard, storefronts boarded up, a barber pole leaning, a single gas pump that might have last worked when my father was young. But then I saw it. A diner. A single neon sign, flickering in pink and blue. Millie's Place. The O and open was struggling to stay lit. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and something fried. The counter was spotless, though the tiles were cracked. A woman in her 60s stood behind the grill, wiping her hands on a towel. Her gray hair was tied in a bun, and her eyes had the kind of sharpness that comes from seeing too much. "Car trouble?" she asked without looking up. I nodded. "Radiator. Think there's a mechanic around." "Not since Ray passed," she said. "But you can call if you find a phone that still works." She slid a plate toward me. 2 eggs, toast, and bacon I hadn't ordered. "Eat," she said. "You look like you've been running from something." When I reached for my wallet, she stopped me. "We don't do fancy here." There was something about the way she said it. Gentle, but final. That made me pause. It wasn't about money. It was about something else entirely. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the hollow streets like memory itself. I didn't know it yet, but that night in Eldridge Junction would test everything I thought I knew about luck, kindness, and what it really means to belong. Sometimes, the places we stumble into are the ones meant to stop us in our tracks. Millie's Diner was the only place in Eldridge Junction that still breathed. The rest of the town looked frozen in time. Windows clouded with dust, a movie theater sign missing all but 2 letters, and a church steeple that leaned slightly, as if tired of waiting for its congregation to come back. I sat at the counter, watching Millie move with quiet efficiency. Every gesture seemed to belong to a rhythm older than habit. She poured coffee from a heavy steel pot, filled my cup to the brim, and said, "Storm's coming. You'll want to stay put tonight." I glanced out the window. The sun had disappeared behind bruised clouds, the kind that promised rain or worse. "I just need to get back on the road," I said. "Job interview in the morning." "Not tonight, you won't," she replied matter-of-factly. "This desert doesn't care about your schedule." Her words weren't unkind, just rooted in a truth I couldn't argue with. I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong, earthy, and just slightly burnt, like every cup I'd ever had in small-town diners across America. It tasted like honesty. I tried to ask more about the town. "What happened here? Looks like folks packed up and left overnight." Millie shrugged, eyes on the griddle. "People leave for all kinds of reasons. Some for work, some for pride, some just get tired of being seen." I didn't quite understand, but there was something about her tone that told me to let it be. When I'd finished eating, she nodded toward a booth near the window. "If you need to rest, you can stretch out there. I lock up at 9. You'll be safe." It wasn't exactly the invitation I'd expected, but I was too tired and too uneasy about the darkening sky to refuse. As I settled into the booth, I noticed a framed photograph on the wall behind me. It showed the diner in its early days, bright and busy, with families smiling out front. Beside the door stood a man in a white apron, tall, confident, hand resting lightly on Millie's shoulder. The same handkerchief she wore now, tied around her wrist, appeared in the picture, bright red even in the faded print. I was about to ask about him when a low rumble shook the window panes. The storm had arrived. It's strange how safety can find you in the most unlikely places, if you're humble enough to accept it. That night, the storm didn't just pass, it settled. Rain lashed the diner windows in waves, the kind of downpour that makes you wonder if the world is trying to wash something away. Millie had locked the front door but left the lights dimmed, a small radio humming softly behind the counter. I couldn't sleep. The booth was narrow, and every creak of the old building felt like a whisper from the past. Around midnight, I heard the faint chime of the bell above the door, except Millie hadn't opened it. She looked up sharply, then relaxed. "It's just Hank," she said. "Don't mind him." A man in his 70s stepped in from the rain, water streaming from his coat. His hat was pulled low, but I could see sharp eyes beneath the brim, gray and measuring. He nodded to Millie, then looked at me. "Traveler?" he asked. I nodded. "Car trouble. Just waiting out the storm." He grunted. "Storm's one thing, but this town has its own kind of weather." He took a seat 2 stools away and folded his hands on the counter. Millie poured him coffee without asking. The silence that followed was dense. Finally, Millie broke it. "Hank's our night watchman," she said. "What's left of one. Someone's got to keep an eye on what's worth keeping," Hank said. "Even if it's only memories." I didn't know what they meant by that, but before I could ask, the radio crackled, first with static, then a voice. A man's voice, faint but distinct. "If you're out there, Millie, it's time." Millie froze. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe I'd misheard. But Hank set down his cup, staring hard at the radio as if it had spoken a ghost's name. "Not tonight," Millie whispered, reaching over to switch it off. "Not after all these years." When she turned back to me, her eyes had changed. The kindness was still there, but now there was something else behind it. A warning, maybe. "Listen," she said quietly. "You're welcome here until the morning. But there are some rules in this town. Don't go outside after midnight. Don't answer voices calling your name. And whatever happens, don't open that door." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word, as though she'd seen too many who hadn't listened. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell her ghost stories didn't scare me, but something in her expression stopped me. "Understood," I said. Millie nodded. "Good. Because out here, curiosity doesn't just get you in trouble, it keeps you here." Outside, the wind screamed through the hollow streets like a living thing. Somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard my name. Every test of character begins the same way, with a simple rule we think we can bend. I told myself I wasn't the superstitious type. I'd grown up in cities, surrounded by logic and deadlines and the steady hum of reason. But there, in that small diner where time itself seemed reluctant to move, reason didn't carry the same weight. The storm didn't let up. Every few minutes, lightning flashed through the front windows, revealing the deserted street beyond, wet pavement, a leaning lamppost, and the skeletal outline of what used to be a gas station. Between flashes, I thought I saw movement. A shape, then nothing. I turned to Millie, who was sitting now in the corner booth, knitting. The red handkerchief was still tied around her wrist, its color stark against her pale hands. "Millie," I asked quietly, "who was that on the radio?" Her needle stopped. "No one you need to worry about." "But he said your name." She sighed, eyes on the yarn. "Some debts don't go away just because everyone else has." Before I could press further, Hank stood. "I'll check the back," he muttered, grabbing a flashlight from the counter. The diner door rattled under a sudden gust, and for a second, I thought it would fly open. When he disappeared through the kitchen, I felt an odd pull, an itch in the air, like something waiting to be noticed. My gaze drifted to the wall of old photos. One of them, slightly tilted, caught the light from a lightning flash. It showed Millie, younger, standing beside a man in a white shirt. The same man from the first photo. Behind them was a sign, Eldridge Junction Mining Company. But what stopped me cold wasn't the picture. It was what was hidden behind it. The frame had come loose, and tucked in the space behind was a small brass key. Old, heavy, with the letters RC etched faintly on its side. When Millie saw me looking, she rose slowly. "Put that back," she said, voice low. "It was behind your photo," I said. "What's it for?" Her lips pressed thin. "That's not a door you want to open." I hesitated, but something in me, call it curiosity or pride, couldn't let it go. "Millie, if there's danger, I can help." She looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to measure the worth of that sentence. "Help," she echoed softly. That's what he said too. A low thud echoed from the kitchen. Then another. Hank didn't return. The radio crackled again, though it was turned off. And this time, the voice was clearer. "Millie," it said. "You promised. Midnight's here." She closed her eyes, whispering something I couldn't make out. When she opened them again, she met my gaze. "If you're going to help, you'll need to know the truth. But once you do, there's no walking away." Outside, lightning split the sky wide open. The clock on the wall struck 12. Some puzzles don't ask to be solved. They ask if you're ready for what they'll change in you once you do. Millie led me through the swinging door into the kitchen, where the storm's rumble sounded deeper, closer. The lights flickered, revealing old metal shelves lined with jars, flour tins, and, oddly, a framed certificate so faded the name could barely be read. Eldridge Mining Safety Award, 1982. She took the brass key from my hand. "You found this because you were meant to," she said quietly. "Maybe that's mercy. Or maybe it's the town giving you a choice." I frowned. "A choice about what?" "To look away," she said, "or to understand why Eldridge Junction died." She knelt beside an old freezer chest, the kind with chrome handles and rounded corners. The motor was silent. She tapped its side twice, then pulled. The heavy lid opened with a hiss of stale air, not to frozen food, but to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "You're kidding me," I whispered. "Not tonight," she said. "Come." I followed her down, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The air grew colder, smelling faintly of oil and wet stone. At the bottom, the steps opened into a small tunnel, braced by old wooden beams, the kind used in mines. "Before this was a diner," Millie said. "This was the last safe point before the shaft. They called it the junction because miners would gather here before going down. My husband, Robert, he was one of them." The name on the key. "RC," she continued, voice trembling. "One night, the company rushed an extraction. Gas alarms failed. They said it was an accident, but it wasn't. They buried 30 men alive to save on costs. The company paid no restitution, and the town just folded in on itself." The flashlight caught something glinting on the wall, a row of miners' helmets, each with a small brass tag. The air seemed to hum with trapped memory. "I stayed," Millie said. "Couldn't leave him. Couldn't leave what they did." She turned to me, eyes reflecting the faint light. "And every year, on the anniversary, this night, the storm comes. And with it, the voices." A chill ran through me. "You mean, they don't rest?" she whispered. "Not until someone listens." Suddenly, from the far end of the tunnel, came a sound, a slow scrape, like boots on gravel. Then another. Then a faint, rhythmic tapping. Millie raised the flashlight, but the beam flickered. "They come to remind me of the promise," she said. "To tell the truth." I stared at her, heart pounding. "That voice on the radio, was that him?" She nodded. "Robert Cook. The man I loved. The man they left behind." Lightning boomed above us, echoing through the earth. The floor shuddered, dust raining from the beams. I wanted to run, but something held me there, the look in Millie's eyes. Grief and duty, bound together like two threads of the same fabric. "Now you see," she said softly. "The question isn't whether the dead can speak. It's whether the living will listen. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive as light. It rises from the dark, asking if we're brave enough to face it." The tunnel trembled again, dust swirling in thin ribbons through the beam of Millie's flashlight. The tapping grew louder, steadier, like someone walking closer, step by step. I couldn't tell if it came from ahead of us or from somewhere beneath our feet. Millie's voice was steady, though her hand shook. "They want to be heard, not feared. But if fear is all they're given, fear is what they become." Her words hung in the cold air, heavy as the darkness itself. I swallowed hard. "Then let's listen." She nodded once and pressed the brass key into my palm. "It fits the lock by the memorial shaft. You'll see a door at the end of the passage. I can't open it anymore, but you might." We walked deeper into the tunnel, our footsteps echoing against the walls. The old mining supports creaked, ancient timbers groaning under invisible weight. At one point, I thought I saw a movement in the corner of my vision, a shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt. But when I turned, there was nothing there. The passage ended in a rusted metal door, sealed with a corroded padlock. Etched into the iron were 30 faint lines, names once carved, now worn smooth. I counted them. 30. My fingers trembled as I slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, then turned with a reluctant click. The door groaned open. Inside was a narrow chamber, part shrine, part tomb. Candles lined a stone ledge, their wax long dried. A single lantern hung from a nail, still faintly glowing. Beside it, a helmet rested on a wooden crate. The initials RC were carved into the side. And then the air shifted. I could feel it. Pressure, sound, presence. A faint voice, like breath against my ear. "You kept your promise, Millie." She gasped. Tears welled in her eyes. "Robert." The lantern flared brighter, casting long shadows that wavered across the walls. I couldn't move. Every rational thought screamed at me to run, but some part of me knew I was witnessing something sacred, something that demanded reverence. Tell him, Millie whispered. Tell him what they did. I didn't understand at first. Then it came to me. She couldn't leave this town because she'd been the last witness. Her silence had been her prison. I spoke aloud, my voice trembling. They buried the truth, Robert. They blamed faulty wiring, not greed. They left your men below so the company could reopen within a week. Millie tried to fight them, but no one listened. For a heartbeat, the storm above seemed to pause. Then, from the depths of the chamber, a low hum began to rise, a deep, resonant sound, like air moving through stone. The lantern flickered once, twice, then steadied. Millie smiled through her tears. They've heard, she said softly. They can rest now. But just as I exhaled, the floor beneath us cracked with a sharp, thunderous sound. A rush of air hit my face, followed by the distant wail of wind, and a single voice, calling from the darkness. My name. Millie turned sharply. Don't answer it. But it was my voice this time, my own, echoing from the black. Help me. The words came from deeper in the shaft, pleading, fragile. And I realized then that whatever haunted this place wasn't finished. Not yet. The past never truly ends. It waits, patient and buried, for someone brave or foolish enough to dig it up again. The echo of my own voice, my name, my plea, rolled through the tunnel like a ripple through water. Every instinct screamed run, but my legs wouldn't move. The sound was coming from somewhere far below, from the sealed depths of the mine where the men had died. Millie gripped my arm. It's not you, she said, her eyes fierce now, stripped of fear. It's what's left of them, what the mine remembers. It uses what you know, what you love, to draw you closer. But why me? I asked. Because you listened, she said simply. No one's listened in 40 years. The floor groaned again, the sound hollow and alive. A gust of air rose from the shaft, carrying with it the scent of iron, and something older, something like sorrow turned to dust. The lantern flickered wildly. Millie stepped between me and the dark, lifting her chin. Robert, she called, voice trembling but steady. You kept me here too long, love. It's time. The air seemed to answer, a rumble, low and resonant, as if the walls themselves spoke back. Then, from the far side of the chamber, light began to bloom. Not flame, not electricity, something softer, golden, pulsing faintly like breath. In that glow, I saw shapes. Men, faint outlines in miners' helmets, their faces calm, not vengeful. 30 of them. And at the front, one stood apart, broad-shouldered, gentle-eyed. His hand lifted toward Millie, palm open. Robert, she whispered. He didn't speak, not with words. The gesture said everything. Gratitude. Farewell. Release. Millie's knees weakened, and I caught her as she stumbled. He's letting go, she said through tears. But something still holds this place. The light began to fade, and with it came a tremor that ran up through the rock like thunder beneath our feet. The mine was collapsing, slow, inevitable. We have to go, I shouted, pulling her toward the stairs. But she resisted, clutching my sleeve. The diner, she gasped. The radio, there's one last thing. The signal. We have to send the truth before it's gone forever. I didn't understand, but I trusted her. We raced back up the stairs, the ground shuddering behind us. By the time we reached the kitchen, plaster rained from the ceiling, and the fluorescent light above us swung like a pendulum. Millie threw herself at the old radio, twisting the dial until static filled the room. It's still connected to the emergency broadcast line, she said breathlessly. I kept it wired all these years. It was meant for miners in trouble. Now it's for the truth. The static cleared for a second, and a low hum answered, an open line. She pressed the transmit button. This is Millie Cook of Eldridge Junction, she said, voice shaking. To whoever's listening, this town didn't die of neglect. It was buried. They killed those men to save a company's face. 30 names, forgotten by choice. But not anymore. The signal wavered, then steadied. Outside, the storm broke, lightning tearing across the sky, rain washing the dirt from the diner's windows. And then, as suddenly as it began, silence. Millie's shoulders sagged. The red handkerchief at her wrist was damp with sweat and tears. She looked at me and smiled faintly. He's gone, she said. And I'm free. The ground beneath us stopped shaking. The lights flickered once more, then held steady. For the first time since I'd arrived, Eldridge Junction was utterly still. Sometimes confronting the past isn't about fighting ghosts. It's about finally letting the truth breathe. The storm had moved east by morning. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that comes only after a night the earth itself seems to have wept. When I stepped outside, the streets of Eldridge Junction looked almost new. The dust was gone, puddles shimmered in the sun, and the neon open sign at Millie's place glowed steady for the first time. Millie stood by the doorway, her apron folded neatly in her hands. She looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had finally put down a weight she'd carried too long. "Coffee?" she asked, smiling faintly. I nodded. "If it's still on the house." She chuckled, a sound softer than I'd heard before. "We still don't do fancy here." Inside, the diner felt different. Lighter somehow. The air no longer carried that undercurrent of grief. The radio on the counter was silent, but not broken. Its red indicator light blinked faintly, as though something, or someone, had heard her broadcast and answered. While she poured the coffee, I noticed the framed photos had been rearranged. The picture of the miners now sat in the center, polished glass catching the morning light. Beneath it, 30 small name tags rested in a neat row. And beside them, Millie had placed the brass key. "I thought you'd want to keep that," I said. She shook her head. "It belongs here. It's what opened the door. You just helped me turn it." We sat in the quiet, sipping coffee. She told me she'd already called the state office, left a message explaining everything. "Whether they believe me or not doesn't matter," she said. "The truth's out now. That's enough." I looked out at the horizon, where the last trace of the storm lingered like smoke. Something inside me had shifted too. I'd come here desperate for a job, a chance to prove I was moving forward, but I realized I'd been chasing the wrong kind of salvation. Millie must have sensed it. "Sometimes," she said, "we get stranded because we're meant to stop, to see what still matters when everything else is stripped away." I nodded. She was right. When I finally got my car running later that day, thanks to Hank, who appeared from somewhere with a wrench and a knowing grin, the town looked almost alive again. A curtain stirred in a window. A door creaked open. Maybe Eldridge Junction hadn't been as empty as it seemed. Maybe it had just been waiting to be remembered. Before I left, Millie handed me the red handkerchief from her wrist. "Keep this," she said, "so you don't forget that the world still needs honest hearts." I promised I wouldn't. As I drove away, the diner's neon sign glowed smaller in my rearview mirror until it was just a flicker on the horizon, a steady heartbeat in the middle of nowhere. And though I'd entered that town by accident, I knew I'd carry a part of it with me for the rest of my life. Truth doesn't demand applause. It asks only to be spoken and remembered by those who still believe decency matters. I reached Phoenix 2 days later. The sun there was brighter, the streets louder, the people in too much of a hurry to look one another in the eye. I sat in my car outside the office building where my interview was supposed to be and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't go in. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing the next opportunity, the next title, the next thing that would make me feel enough. Because in that quiet diner, with an old woman who had spent her life serving coffee to ghosts, I'd learned something you don't find on a resume. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a widow keeping a promise to the dead. Sometimes it's a stranger stopping long enough to listen. Sometimes it's simply telling the truth, even when no one's asking anymore. I sent an email instead, to a journalist friend I knew in Denver. I told him about Eldridge Junction, about Millie, about the broadcast she made that night. He didn't believe me at first, but a week later he called, voice trembling with awe. "Your story's everywhere," he said. "They reopened the case. State officials are visiting the site tomorrow. Turns out there was a buried shaft, 30 helmets, 30 names." I hung up and sat in silence. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train wailed, a low, mournful sound that somehow felt like peace. A month later, a small article appeared online. Eldridge Junction declared historic memorial site, victims of 1982 mining disaster to receive posthumous honors. There was a photograph of Millie standing by the memorial, the brass key hanging from a ribbon around her neck. Behind her, the diner sign glowed proudly. She'd written a single line under the picture. "We don't do fancy here, but we do what's right." I printed that line and taped it to my desk. Now, whenever life starts to feel too busy or too loud, I think of that stormy night and the woman who turned grief into grace. And I remember that sometimes the most extraordinary moments find us not on the roads we plan, but on the ones we're forced to stop and walk. Because kindness, honesty, and courage don't need a crowd. They just need someone willing to live by them. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who believes that even the smallest act of truth can echo for generations. Because in a world full of noise, what endures most is the quiet power of decency.